there. I don't want to forget it this time. Recording this thing. We got Larry Winslett tonight. He's a local photographer. He's done a whole lot, and I think some of us know him pretty well, but I think you'll all be interested in the Stone Mountain presentation tonight. So Larry, if you would, it's all yours.
Guess I have to unmute first to get going.
That'll be a good idea.
That's a good idea. Okay. Hopefully it'll all flow from there. Well, thank you all for having me back again. Always a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to talk about Stone Mountain, as Hilo said tonight. I first got involved at Stone Mountain over 40 years ago. I was living right outside the park. I could walk in. So I've been around there in one way or another for many, many years. Still there, usually at least once a week, because I do some environmental consulting for the park. I won't go into a whole lot about me since I was just here 2 weeks ago, and like Hilo said, a lot of you know me already. But I do teach for the Atlanta School of Photography, University of North Georgia, John C. Campbell Folk School, lead a lot of workshops, and you can check those out on my website at larrywinslettphotography.com. So won't spend too much time on that, and we'll get into sharing the screen here so I can talk about Stone Mountain. Let's see, let's back up one here. That everything's set up here with that. And as I said, my association with Stone Mountain goes pretty far back at this point. And I really got into photography at Stone Mountain Park. I had my early cameras there, and that was really where I started really getting serious and learning about photography. When I was there, I would go out every day when I lived nearby there, and got to know the place really well. And opening photo here, great place for sunsets, sunrises, the lakes, the reflections, everything's great for that. So I'm going to jump in here, and just for those, I always like to do this slide when I talk about Stone Mountain, because a lot of people think it's owned by a private company or something. Stone Mountain is owned by the state of Georgia. It's a state park run by an association, a little bit different than your other. More like, it's like Jekyll Island, Lanier Islands, they're all authorities, but owned by the state. Stone Mountain's legislated mission is to provide a Confederate memorial, public recreation, and protect the natural resource. And that gets to be kind of a complicated mission sometimes, as you might imagine. It's billed as the world's largest exposed piece of granite, approximately 300 million years old. It's a big rock, that's for sure. It is one of Georgia's most important ecological and recreation sites. It draws more visitors annually than many of our national parks, well into the millions. It is also one of the most biologically diverse places in the state of Georgia. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute, but a really important site on a number of levels with it. The mountain was prized for its granite for building early on. It was quarried into the early part of the last century. I forget the date the quarrying actually stopped. But there are, you can see evidence on the mountain, around the mountain in some places. Granite from the mountains used in buildings in Atlanta and Washington. It's some of the purest granite in the world. Much purer than the surrounding outcrops like Arabia and Panola. And of course, Arabia has been extensively quarried as well. Fortunately, they finally stopped at Stone Mountain. It didn't do quite as much there. So time and man both have an impact on the mountain. Quarrying, memorial carving, the erosion that goes on and exfoliation that goes on the mountain time. So it's a living piece of rock. A lot goes on there in a geologic sense with it. I mentioned the diversity. This is one of the reasons. This is how I got into the sort of an amateur naturalist to begin with, and got into, because I was seeing a lot of different habitat types, a lot of different species. And that's what really makes it great for a photographer. You have a lot of different possibilities. You have, of course, the mountain itself, which is a particular type of habitat in its own right. And it's, from a distance, it looks like a big bare rock, but in reality, it's totally covered in life forms of some kind, pretty much, except for the areas where people walk all the time. That it is a little more bare in those areas. You have the lakes, none of which are natural, by the way. There are headwaters of Yellow River, Little Stone Mountain Creek, Stone Mountain Creek, a number of creeks that come into the park from surrounding areas and feed the lakes there. And of course, the lakes make another type of habitat that's interesting and can provide a lot of different photo opportunities year round in the different seasons with it. Stone Mountain Park has some of the only old growth forest in the metro Atlanta area. Off of, if you're facing the mountain where the carving is, that's a good reference point. To the left of that is an area of Piedmont Mesic old growth forest. And then on some of the south areas are some of the very old forests as well. So and a great tree diversity in the park, which is also interesting. The streams, as I said, that feed the lakes can be interesting. Some of them are temporary. The mountain itself, I was there just last week when the big rain hit on Wednesday, and the whole mountain kind of turns into one gigantic waterfall, water coming off everywhere. It can be really interesting, different places. Some of the streams are more permanent, but then there are a lot of temporary ones as well. You have open field type habitats like in the songbird habitat and some other areas around the park that gives you another type of species, and are also great for birding and certain wildlife that you'll encounter in those areas if you're there. You have the flat rock outcrops, which tend to have sort of a different species diversity than what you might find higher on the mountain itself. A lot of flat rock outcrops in DeKalb, Rockdale, and Gwinnett counties. And you'll find similar species at Stone Mountain's outcrops as well there. This is an aerial view of the park in 1955. You'll notice one of the most striking things you'll notice is no lakes, no water. As I said, none of the lakes are natural. This would be the north face of the mountain. It's kind of upside down. That area right in there, if you can see my little bouncing ball, is where the memorial carving is. This is the steepest face of the mountain here. Fast forward to 2010 aerial shot, and again, the same angle, you can see that face here, the memorial lawn, and now you see the lakes on both the north and south sides of the park that are there now. So you have a lot of, that's the reason you have so many such a great diversity of habitats that you have in the park. You'll also see, and this aerial doesn't quite get all of it because the park owns a lot of land north of 78, Highway 78, and also quite a bit more on the southern side than you see here in this, which is mostly forested areas. This map kind of shows the general outlay a little bit better. This is actually this is in one of my books on Stone Mountain. It's in there, and this is from around 2008 map of the park. and you'll see the lakes, the memorial carving on the north slope here. You'll see the areas north of 70, Highway 78 up here that the park owns. Since this was actually done, the park actually has picked up another large parcel over in this area and another smaller piece up in this area. So they're constantly looking for land to expand the park to create buffers if they can find them and when they get them. Now, the shaded areas that are on this map, kind of the brown color, those are all protected and off limits to development. That was a law that was passed in 1995. I was working with a group called the Friends of Stone Mountain Park, which still exists today. And we got that at the same time we got the legislation that protected 65% of Jekyll Island. We went after both at the time, and Friends of Stone Mountain, the Sierra Club, a group called Friends of Georgia, a lot of different groups were involved. And so all of that area is basically off limits to new development. So it's going to stay, hopefully, forested and in a more natural state in those areas. The existing developed footprint in Stone Mountain really hasn't changed that much since the state bought the park in 1958. It's stayed pretty much consistent. They've not gotten too far outside of those original boundaries of development with it. So getting back to the plant life in the park and the great diversity, this is a shot of the yellow daisies in the fall on the south slope of Stone Mountain. Years when you have good rainfall, you can have some pretty spectacular displays at Stone Mountain. It can actually be one of the great wildflower displays around. You can also get some of that at Arabia Mountain and Panola Mountain, the two sister granite mountains in the area with it. This is a close-up of the yellow daisy here. See what it looks like up close. And, there is some literature out there you might stumble upon at some point that says that the yellow daisy grows nowhere at Stone Mountain, and that's completely not true. It is mostly a granite outcrop. Endemic is where you're likely to find it, but you'll find it in Rockdale, DeKalb, and Gwinnett counties. Pretty much anywhere you find the granite outcrops, you're likely to find some yellow daisy there. It actually grows pretty well wherever you put it. When I first moved to Dahlonega in 1996, I brought a lot of seed up and threw them out in the front yard just to see what would happen. A couple of years later, my wife was asking me, can we get rid of a few of these yellow daisies that are taking over the yard? So they adapted very well to the climate up here. A lot of the species you're going to find there you're probably only going to find them on the granite outcrop. Sunnybells, sandwort being the white ones, sunnybells being the yellow ones. One of the things that's interesting about the granite outcrops and their species, if you're a photographer who loves macro photography or dealing with small subjects, a lot of these flowers and plants are very small that are adapted to the granite outcrops. The sunnybells, they'll grow to a foot or so tall, but the flowers are very small. Sandwort, probably 1/4 of an inch across, very tiny species. Dayflowers, can find those at Stone Mountain as well. So some of these are kind of common in the area, at least in North Georgia. Others are more rare. One of the species is one of the signature species of the granite outcrops is the red moss stonecrop, Dimorphus simosa, its Latin name. It's the red moss that fills a lot of the depressions and stuff at Stone Mountain, Arabia Mountain places. Early in the spring, usually in March, you'll start to see it, maybe even late February if it's warm these days. And this is what it looks like in its blooming state, but it's definitely one of the signature species, along with the trout lilies. The trout lilies are another one. They are the Diamorpha or red moss. You'll find that on the mountain outcrops. The trout lilies are going to be in those southern forests at the park on the south side, and you can have just the forest floor can just be covered with them in good years. So very interesting species. Some you might not expect to find maybe around here, like prickly pear cactus, which is native to the outcrops. That's another one that you'll find. Commonly blooms a little bit later, more towards summer. Typically blooming, the whole blooming, as many years as I've been there now, one of the things that has been interesting to observe is the changes in the blooming schedule. Most things are a little earlier than they were, 30 years ago. They don't bloom, they're blooming earlier, a lot of things. Species like the rock pinks, another one that grows on the outcrops. There's actually two of these. One is a smaller one that's about, probably the size of a dime, the flower head. The other one's more like a quarter would be in size. So a couple of those, very interesting, pretty species. There's a lot of common native species. Stone Mountain really is, as far as plant life, is kind of right at the end of the Appalachian chain. So I see species at Stone Mountain that I'm going to see a lot more of up where I'm at now in North Georgia than I do down there. But you're going to find your spiderworts, a couple of species of those you'll find at Stone Mountain. You will find some of your trillium in the forest, particularly the nodding trillium is one you'll find there usually. The iris, the dwarf irises, you'll probably find a few of those in the woodlands along the trails in the spring, again, late spring usually for these winds. Violets, of course, very common pretty much everywhere from Atlanta up anyway. And you'll find the yellow ones, the purple ones, the white ones, the variegated ones. You'll find everything. So there's no shortage of those to shoot. Species like bluets, you'll find both the true bluet, like this one, and you'll also find the smaller bluets that you may even find in your front yard and your front lawn sometimes, little tiny ones. Both of them can be challenging to photograph though. So anytime you're going to the granite outcrops, especially in the spring, you want to make sure to bring your macro lenses with you, some way of getting close. Other species like horse nettle, some people consider a weed. I think it's a very interesting wildflower in the nightshade family. That's an interesting one. Cardinal flower, that's another species that's kind of on the borderline. I'll find more of it a little farther north, but you get a great mix there at Stone Mountain. There are also the unusual and rare species that you'll find at Stone Mountain. Blue curl, another one that's more common a little further north, but relatively rare in Georgia overall. This is one we find at the songbird habitat in Stone Mountain. And it's kind of a mid to late summer species a lot of times in finding it. Our native columbine, which has been declining across North Georgia, you will still find a few of those at Stone Mountain, generally in the nature garden area there where you might find columbine in the spring. Others that are in more inaccessible areas like the glade windflower. This is one that grows up on the north slopes and some of the very steep areas where it's probably not really advisable to poke around too much. If you don't know the area, that's an area of the mountain on the north slopes people can get into trouble on if they're not careful. The rock aster is one of the rarer asters that we have. Asters, of course, are one of the more common species. There's something over 20,000 species of asters. But this was one of the rarer ones. It's on granite outcrops, particularly Stone Mountain, 4 or 5 locations. Interestingly, this is one of only 2 species that are mentioned in state law in Georgia. The other one, our state flower, the Cherokee rose, which is not native to Georgia, but yet is our state flower and is mentioned. The rock aster is, and in the 1995 law that I worked on with others to protect part of Stone Mountain and Jekyll Island, this species got mentioned by name to protect its specific habitat areas within Stone Mountain Park. So an interesting and very pretty species too, I think. Others, like the pink lady slipper, are again sort of in decline in the area, but you do find them occasionally in some of the forests there. The education department at Stone Mountain has actually rescued pink lady slippers from some other locations and brought them in to Stone Mountain. That's some work that I've helped with my work with the Sierra Club and others. The granite stone crop is a state protected species. It is very similar to the red moss. It's its green cousin, but much more rare. This is another one you find on the north slopes of the mountain, primarily in moss beds, under pines, and places like that. Again, so another rare one. The Georgia aster, this is another species that actually its habitat was eradicated in the park for the 1996 Olympics. If you may remember, Stone Mountain Park hosted a couple of events for the 1996 Olympics, the archery and cycling venues, which have since been restored to what's now known as the songbird habitat area of the park. And the Georgia aster was reintroduced there and has had some limited success. This is a federal candidate species for listing, relatively rare. A lot of good work's been done with this species actually over in Stevens County near Currey Mountain by the Forest Service. It's done some good work restoring this species. The flat rock onion, another rare one that is more known from some of the Rockdale County outcrops, but it has been reintroduced to Stone Mountain and is really thriving there. This is one that I worked with some biologists from the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, one in particular, Jim Allison, and we reintroduced this species to Stone Mountain, and it really has done very, very well there with it. I said the mountain is really completely covered in life forms, and the biggest life form that's covered with are lichens. There's a fellow named Sean Beeching who has researched lichen, and he has identified over 250 species of lichen on Stone Mountain and on Stone Mountain and the outcrops around it. So there's a tremendous amount of plant life there, very interesting patterns they form. Scenes like this where it looks like at first glance what you're seeing is rock, but actually you're not seeing any rock at all. It's completely covered in lichen of different types. There is rock under there. It's completely covered in lichen. This is an orange one. There's a yellow one. Sometimes they look like somebody's painted on the rocks on those. So very interesting species lichen. There are 2 federally protected species at the park. One is the pool sprite. It has another common name, snorkelwort, and I forget its Latin name was actually changed. Its original Latin name was Amphianthus pusillus. It's been changed to something granite pusillus now, the Latin name on it. Grows in the little vernal pools on top of Stone Mountain, Arabia Mountain, Panola Mountain, and this is a great macro subject. You have to get down on the ground with it. It's probably less than an inch from tip to tip of leaf. The flower itself, when it flowers, Early summer is, I doubt it's a quarter of an inch across. It's very tiny species. Only known from about 47 places in Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. A little bit closer look at it. You look at the little distance shot. It has a rosette at the bottom of the pool with a long stem, and the leaves float on top where it blooms. So an interesting little aquatic species with it. It's actually in the snapdragon family with it. One of the other things that happened in 1996 with the Olympics, and when we passed that law in 1995, and a big chunk of the top of the mountain was fenced off to keep people out of it. And the entire reason was to let these federally protected plant species recover. When the fence went up, the pool sprite was down to about 3 or 4 pools. It's now in about 18 pools. And all it took was just putting the fence up and keeping people from trampling in the pools all the time with it. The other species, I've said there were 2. The other one is called the black-spored quillwort, or Isoedes melanospora, Latin name. It's a little grass-looking plant. This is one of the rarest plants in the world, only known from about 5 locations. Arabia Mountain and Stone Mountain are probably the 2 biggest populations of it. Both places have been working with Fish and Wildlife Service to protect and cultivate and reintroduce this species. The 3rd largest population of this species is currently in cultivation at Stone Mountain, and we're working to reintroduce it in the field. That's something I said I do environmental consulting with the park. That's one of the projects that I've worked on for quite a while now. And we've made a lot of progress in it. So again, a lot of these endangered species, if they just get a chance, you know, they can be reintroduced, they can be cultivated. Very glad that Stone Mountain and Arabia Mountain both have made that commitment with those. On the not so good side of the diversity, in a way, Stone Mountain is also a real laboratory for our invasive species like wisteria, parrot feather, kudzu, honeysuckle, water primrose, a couple of aquatics here. And the aquatics always end up, I said those streams come into the park. People dump their aquarium species and they end up in the lakes at Stone Mountain. And a couple of these water primrose in the right conditions can outcompete kudzu. You think kudzu grows fast? This stuff in the right conditions can fill up a pond in no time. Parrot feather, another one, but it needs the shallower, warmer water, but it can still be a problem as well. Stone Mountain has had a very aggressive invasive species program since 2005. They've done a lot of great work there of eradicating some of these species, some of these troublesome species, so they don't cancel out the native species that are there. All of that stuff and more makes Stone Mountain a great location for photographers with the mountain and the lakes and all the different species to photograph there all times of year, especially spring and fall. Can be great times at all the outcrops in Stone Mountain for sure. Great times for photographing there. So if you're going out there, based on what I've said, you've got all sorts of possibilities. You've got macro landscapes, sunrises, sunsets, wildlife. So if you're going for a day of photographing at Stone Mountain, you want to bring a good diversity of equipment because you really don't know what you might encounter when you're there. It is advisable, nice sturdy shoes if you're walking on the outcrops. Another thing that comes in really handy is knee pads or something to kneel on if you're wanting to photograph some of those small species you have to get down low for. So those can come in very handy if you're there. The park has a pretty extensive trail system in it. I think somewhere around the area of around 35 miles of trails total in the park. You're looking into park. The white trail here is what's known as the Cherokee Trail. That's the one that goes all the way around across the shoulder of the mountain on the west end of the mountain. That's one of the oldest national recreation trails in the country. I believe it was like the fourth or fifth one designated there back in the early 60s. But all of these others are trails. They connect, some of them are connector trails. There's Nature Gardens Trail, the Songbird Habitat Trails. There are trails by the lakes and different areas down here. Indian Island, of course, has its own trails. The Muskogee Trail up just inside the East Gate between some of the upper lakes. We'll take a closer look at some of those and talk a little bit about what you might find there. The Nature Garden trails, you're going to find a lot of native plants. There's streams. The Cherokee Trail is going to come down into the back part of this where you can connect into it. There's also a connecting back to Confederate Hall at the west end of the park. There's a couple of streams in there. Some of the old growth forest is in this area. So it's a really neat area to photograph in. You can also cross the road. There's a trail that's not on here that comes out the back of this parking lot out by this where the stream crosses down here, and that's an interesting area as well. Not as developed a trail, but it's used enough, there's no trouble finding it. The Songbird Habitat has two sections. One is where in the open fields area, more open fields, and then it goes off into the woodlands again. And in the spring, you'll find a lot of things like bloodroot, those type of species in this area. To photograph, you may encounter everything from foxes to deer to a lot of different bird species in this area. The park has a pretty healthy deer and turkey population that you can encounter at different times as well. The Muskogee Trail, which is inside the East Gate, very small parking area. One of the areas that most people never go to, but very interesting lakeside trail, forested area in here, just off of Highway 78, in between two arms of Stone Mountain Lake where they come in. Another interesting, great fall color area. Indian Island, of course, the Cherokee Trail comes around by the covered bridge. You can pick up the trail here onto Indian Island. Indian Island's one of my favorite fall color locations. Great tree diversity there. Always love it. And some great reflections in the lake in the fall. In the afternoon, like when the western sun's hitting this side, you get great reflections down here. In the early morning, you get the opposite. You get the reflections from the mountainside back into the water. So that north-south stretch where you get the sun on the east and the west in the morning and afternoon, great reflections in this area to photograph. And as I said, just a great diversity, birds, butterflies, a lot of wildflower species, things to photograph all over the place there. Sunrises and sunsets. This is the way the lakes are set up. They make great reflections. This is on Venable Lake, actually looking west at sunset. I mentioned the yellow daisies, and so I'm getting toward the end kind of here. I want to mention those again because I do think it's a great opportunity, and it's particularly relevant right now because we're coming up on that time of year. Most of you've probably heard of the Yellow Daisy Festival at Stone Mountain. It's one of the biggest arts and crafts shows in the country. But that's the same time of year that the yellow daisies generally start to bloom. And what's interesting at Stone Mountain is how they bloom. They'll bloom up at the top of the mountain first, Then they'll bloom down the southern slopes and eventually back around to the north side in the forested, more forested rock outcrop areas. So I've just got a few photos here of different areas with the yellow daisies. This is on the south slope in the old quarry area in here. This is around on the north slope where they're coming down in one of the areas. You also get the mix of the blazing star in a lot of locations. So those purple magentas with the yellow makes a great color combination in these. The south slope, you can get these great bands running all through the areas there. I'm hoping, you know, the rainfall we've had this year, I'm hoping it's going to be a really good year for yellow daisies this year. Another one from the south slopes here, one on the north slope, forested areas here, a little more in the woodlands here. Again, along the Cherokee Trail, another shot with the yellow daisies, another south slope shot. So there's just tremendous possibilities with them there. I want to take a minute here. I'll go through this last little part pretty quick, but I just wanted to mention the Georgia Nature Photographers Association and their conservation efforts. I've been doing a little bit of work with them as well. A lot of my photography has revolved in the conservation community with the Georgia Nature Photographers Association, which some of you may be members of. Their expo's coming up in a few weeks, virtual and field trips. I've done a lot of work with Georgia Forest Watch and the Sierra Club. I do want to mention this in particular. COVID has seen an enormous increase in the amount of people coming to the mountains in North Georgia. And all nature photographers should be concerned about this, our responsibilities when we're out there, you know, prioritizing nature over photography, educating yourself about the places and species that you might be photographing so you don't damage things you shouldn't. You know, thinking about your impacts, discretion when sharing locations if they're very sensitive areas, following rules and regulations, leaving no trace, and promoting and educating others about these principles. These are basically the basic principles that Georgia Nature Photographers and other organizations put forward. But the reason I want to mention this specifically right now is during the COVID and people, you know, they couldn't do the normal things. So a lot of the areas in North Georgia, the Appalachian trailheads and places have been really swamped a lot of times. The Forest Service is not keeping up with trash. It's overflowing like this in places at times. So if you do come up and you go to these places, make sure to pack it out, especially if the trash receptacles are full. Don't just do it like a lot of people are doing it as well, just throw it on the ground. Then it ends up all over the place. Our national forests are really taking a beating with some of this stuff that's going on. Our national parks also have seen an uptick in a lot of this kind of activity. But just as nature photographers, you know, be careful out there, educate others, and help out with this. National monuments are another one that are often understaffed. The Rio Grande del Norte in New Mexico, northern New Mexico, where I lead workshops every year, one of my favorite locations, one of the great nature photography destinations. Again, same type of stuff. And it also applies to Stone Mountain, Arabia Mountain, and Panola, which have also seen enormous upticks during COVID and people getting out into the woods, which is great on the one hand, but hopefully people behave when they're out doing it with it. And, you know, you get this kind of stuff on these outcrops, people driving on them. This is all broken glass. People just smash things up. So be careful if you're out there and try to help educate others when you're doing it. Okay, a little bit of shameless self-promotion here right at the end. This is a book I just finished working on it's been out about 2 years now, called Georgia Mountain Treasures. You can actually get this book for free. Uh, I did a lot of the photography. I did all of the Photoshop work in this book. I did a lot of the photographs and map work in this book for Georgia Forest Watch. This book can give you some great ideas on places to go in the North Georgia mountains. You can actually download this book for free at the Georgia Sierra Club's website and at the Georgia Forest Watch's website. With those, you can get this one for free out there. My books on Stone Mountain can be helpful there. The Wildflower book actually applies basically to North Georgia with a focus on granite outcrops. So those are both out there floating around. Some things that are coming up. I mentioned the GNP Expo. I am leading an outing at Stone Mountain for them during that, actually on September 14th, where I'm going to take people into 2 or 3 different areas. We're going to spend some time in songbird habitat. We're going to spend some time by the lake, see if we can get some great sunset. So I'll take you to some good locations there, anybody who's interested. I'm also doing for the park a couple of times a year. I usually do a couple of free hikes, just very casual, a couple of hours. So on October 3rd, which is a Sunday, I'm doing one of those this year, this fall. Again, we're going to meet at the songbird habitat, and we'll spend a couple of hours just talking photography, seeing what we can find. And so it's always a lot of fun. It's free. We try to put the limit at about 18 maximum on that. It gets a little weighty if we get more than that. I also, with Stone Mountain, Arabian Mountain, and Panola Mountain, we've been doing sort of a festival in recent years, for the last 10 years actually, called Monadnock Madness. Monadnocks are kind of the official name for these granite domes. So next year on March 12th and 20th, we're doing a couple of those, and it's a lot of fun. It's kind of crazy. We start at Stone Mountain, then we go to Arabian Mountain, then we go to Panola Mountain. We do them all in one day, all 3 of our major granite outcrops. So it's a good day out and a lot of fun, and something else to keep in mind. I mentioned northern New Mexico, one of the great landscape destinations. I'll be going back there this October and next October. Going to be doing some locations that I've never done with groups before in some of the high country there. I'm going during fall. I usually go in the spring, but I'm going in the fall next year. Also have 2 on tap at Bosque del Apache, both this year and next year, where we do Bosque del Apache and White Sands. The one this year is for Georgia Nature Photographers Association. If you're not familiar with that area, incredible birding place to go to. White Sands, landscape photo opportunities. So 2 awesome outings there. I've got some stuff coming up next year. St. Augustine for the alligator farm, the sunrises, the old town, always a lot of fun. And that leads into the Georgia Nature Photographers Expo, which will be at Jekyll Island next year, hopefully with the COVID thing, who knows, but hopefully all of this can go. That leads right into that nature. And 2 new locations for workshops that I have not taken workshop groups to before. New River Gorge in West Virginia, our newest national park in that area. That should be a lot of fun, really interesting. And the New York Finger Lakes region, we're going to focus on the Ithaca area and the southern end of Cayuga Lake and the one right next to it, the 2 bigger ones. A lot of waterfalls and stuff in that area. So really looking forward to those. Those should all be great fun. So anybody who's interested, I'd love to sign you up for any of the workshops. I do represent Hunt's Photo and Video out of Boston. Some of you may be familiar with them already. And if you're not, and you're looking for equipment, Alan is a great resource. Tell him you heard me talking about them, and he'll see what he can do for you. So I think that gets us to the blank screen. So that's the